Today is a really special panel discussion looking at Aboriginal methodologies and Aboriginal ways of working, Aboriginal ways of thinking, and Aboriginal ways of doing things. And it's a collaboration, or it's in partnership with the University of Technology of Sydney, which I'm lucky enough to have a connection to. And all of our speakers today are also connected to UTS. I might start with Larissa Behrendt, who's with us at that end, who's a Eualeyai woman who is an extraordinary leader in Indigenous affairs and studies, and has really been someone who I think has guided a lot of contemporary conversations around how we've been starting to think about our communities and our issues. Alison Whittaker, who some of you might know as an extraordinary writer. And your book has gone straight out of my head, the title of your book. Can you fill me in for that?
Oh, hang on.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, do I? Oh, no. There we go.
There we go. Lemons in the Chicken Wire. An extraordinary book who I'd encourage you all to have a look at. And Jason De Los Santos, who is also working at UTS. Is that name right? Did I get it wrong? I'm having a bad day. Who is working at UTS, who has also been working on a PhD at the moment, but also looking at these ideas of how to work with community, building in community knowledge and working with ideas around Aboriginal methodologies. First, I should probably start the questioning because most people here might not have the... Oh, actually, sorry. First, I was going to give everyone the opportunity to introduce themselves because how we read on paper and how we introduce ourselves on country, in people, with people and in person is often quite different. So I thought, did everyone just want to introduce themselves, maybe talk a little bit about where you come from, your background, and I guess how you might fit into this story a little bit?
Do I? Or do I just do this? Okay. I'm not sure. Anyway. Thanks, Alison. Thank you, Jonathan, for the acknowledgement of country. And I just want to congratulate you on an extraordinary installation that I think has really given us a chance to engage in living Indigenous culture and has given people who wouldn't otherwise think of how vibrant and alive Indigenous culture is a chance to experience that, and it's given us a chance to have these really important conversations. I'm a Eualeyai Kamillaroi woman, which is from northwest New South Wales, and I grew up in Sydney really as part of the Red Fern community. So I have a strong family upbringing that was really focused on the impact of dispossession and the stolen generations on our family, but was always also deeply rooted in the Red Fern community with its political activism, but also, as you would know, especially sort of through that 1970s period when I was still a child, but was really about a kind of self-determination in action. So the establishment of the first Aboriginal Medical Service, the first Aboriginal Legal Service, all of those community activities. So I guess that was kind of part of my worldview, and I think Jonathan is right that it's important to us. We often sort of joke as blackfellas, as soon as we meet somebody, our first question isn't, what do you do? It's where you're from. And we do place each other in our family through all of these connections. They're instrumental, but I also think it's a great way to start a panel on Indigenous methodologies because apart from the fact that for a lot of us, and I'm sure this will come out later, place and country are always a level in the work that we do, and especially in creative practice. But also, I think Indigenous people, when we come to philosophising or looking at projects or doing our practice, are very mindful that our position kind of defines who we are, and that's a real contrast to the way the academy sees it, where there's often a false pretense that people can write without a bias or a prejudice. Of course, whatever your cultural background, wherever you're from, you bring your lived perspective to how you see the world. And I think one thing Indigenous methodology does do by focusing first on who we are, where we come from, how we're connected, is it's kind of very honest about saying, this is where I sit, so when I'm telling you how I see the world, it's coming from this place.
So Yama, I'm Alison Whittaker, as Jonathan introduced me, and I'm a Gomeroi girl, so I grew up in Canada in northwest New South Wales. My family there are the Golds. So my mum is Tanya Gold, who obviously married into a Whittaker family. And I am just so stunned at, again, like what you said, how much Gadigal land can take and how much it sustains and reinvigorates us. And I came here when I was 17 to come and study at UTS. So really it was knowledge and knowledge about the law and knowledge about my position within it that drew me to this place. And I guess I've stayed. It seems like this morning it's almost come, this afternoon, it's almost come full circle as I entered through the gates just up there, and I could hear my language speaking to me, and it was the most surreal experience. I didn't even need to have the map to know where it was drawing me to, and I was so moved by that transposition of space, that there's so much solidarity and connection between Indigenous peoples, even though we are so diverse between ourselves, that there's a common shared experience there and a sense of love.
Nana Manoru, Naru Gadigal country. Greetings everyone, my name is Jason de Santolo. My family name is Daylight. I'm born in Darwin and my tribes are Garrwa and Barunggam. Garrwa is from the southwest Gulf country of the Northern Territory and Barunggam is southeast Queensland. I was born in Darwin I was born in Darwin and but was taken away and grew up in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I came back to the community about 20 or so years ago, back to Borroloola, and since then I've been on a journey. And one of my favourite scholars, Gregory Kayete, talks about all human knowledge coming from the creative journey. And I think the further we go into this journey, we realise that all knowledge is relatable. We relate to all knowledge according to Garrwa law, and also the idea that, so for example, my skin name is Balyorinji. If I travel 500 kilometres away from my community, we automatically have a way of relating to the people there, to the environment, to the ecology that sustains us. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things of working with an amazing team and coming to events like this, is that you see the connections between us and the connections with the things that sustain us. So thank you very much, Jonathan.
No, I have to say it's a real honour to have all of you here, because we've sat down a few times and we've been lucky enough to be in some workshops where this notion of looking at Aboriginal methodologies and what they mean and how they can be implemented is really important. And I think that I have to say, you guys, it wasn't that long ago that all of us were in a workshop, and there was something special happening that day where we were all sitting down and had the opportunity to really share these ideas about how we approach knowledge, how we approach the revival of knowledge in many instances, how we approach the creation of new knowledge within an Aboriginal worldview. And I guess that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. And I guess the one thing that I'd like to sort of start today's conversations about with is, of course, this notion of the Garden Palace was lost. This idea that people were prepared to lose a building, and arguably I would say that most people have been prepared to lose it because it was destroyed in the fire. This idea that this very Western idea that you destroy something by putting it through the fire, you put it into the ashes. And of course, for a long time, I felt like I was sitting with this very Western view. I felt like when I found out about this destruction and the fire, I felt trauma. And that's all I felt. I felt that enormous loss. But of course, I've been lucky enough my mind has been shifted on a number of occasions. I've been guided by elders, and of course reminded very, very well that fire is not the end in an Aboriginal worldview. Our way of understanding fire is it's the beginning of something. It's the start of a new story. You burn something to build resilience. You burn something to gain something new. And that really was the starting point for this project. And I thought that might just be a really interesting starting point for this conversation. This idea that Aboriginal worldviews can shift and change the way we see everything, and even this colonial history. I can't tell you how many times people challenged me and said, well, why is an Aboriginal person telling me about colonial history? Which I thought was really interesting, this idea that, of course, it's this Aboriginal worldview that has brought this building back to life. And so on that idea, I guess I was keen to find out from you guys how, and maybe it's through a story like that, you know, this idea of just an idea, but how would you describe Aboriginal methodologies or Aboriginal worldviews and how you're starting to think about them and incorporate them? And often, I think for all of us, it's for the, you know, we're having to retrain our mind in that process. Chase?
I guess one of the things that I've been really lucky to do is to collaborate with Victor Stephenson, who's been revitalising traditional fire techniques across the country. And he uses a principle called bridging knowledge. And it's about sort of bringing elders together on country in a respectful process so that you can revitalise cultural practices. And I guess up home, we've never stopped using fire as a technique to connect with the land, to harmonise the seasons, but also as a cultural practice. It's really important because it's an embodied practice. And one of the first things I did when I went back to country was learn how to burn safely. And I guess the duality of the systems that we have in terms of the methodology that I'm using in my PhD is that it's embedding the cultural framings, you know, the way that our world is communicated, the way that we relate to each other. They are embedded into the methodology that I'm using. So, for example, there are two key concepts for us is Jungai and Nimbarinji. So, for example, you're Jungai for your mother's country. So you have a big responsibility to look after the land on your mother's country, and you look after that for the Nimbarinji. So there's a balancing act in that. So you can't speak for your country without your Jungai. And part of that carries on into knowledge as well, and how you relate to the land as you travel through it. And I guess one of the things that really sparked my interest in those sort of things is that these are the things that create conditions for the continuation of life. You know, I'm exploring renewal, and the idea of ceremony, the idea of all these cultural practices, they're all ways that we maintain our connection to each other and to the land, and it's about renewal, and that's about maintaining conditions for life on Earth. And I think we can see, and we look around us, we see this beautiful space around us here, but it's a pocket. If we travelled 100 metres, we would suffer trying to find some water unless we poured it from a tap. And I think understanding that we're all connected, and that the deep knowledge of our ancestors is really important in continuing and maintaining and growing a society that is going to be really there for future generations, where our children can drink from the rivers, you know, where we don't have to worry about the basics of life. And that's why I think our Aboriginal methodologies offers to society at the moment. I think the elders we're at a point in history where things have to change, and change radically. And I think this is one of the things that we can take up in Australia as well.
Here we go. For me, Indigenous methodologies is all a kind of maybe a verb, better thought as a verb rather than a noun. It's something that's very easy to identify, but really hard to describe to someone. When I first, I guess, to kind of bring it back to my journey as someone who's recently just finally finished a degree, Indigenous methodologies was the stuff that felt right. It felt like there was knowledge that was being developed that wasn't violent, or that was contributing in a reciprocal way to the people who it wanted to know about. And perhaps even more importantly than that, Indigenous methodologies are about that process of shifting how we understand Indigenous people from something that we know to people who know stuff about themselves and the wider world. And that comment about how do you know colonial history, Indigenous people know so much outside of ourselves. It's often thought that in Indigenous studies the only thing we could ever look at is just a mirror, and it has so many more dimensions than that. And I guess that kind of critical Indigenous studies can tell us so much more about how people look at us, that is telling of them rather than of ourselves as something that's known. Yeah. I don't know, sorry, it's really distracting to hear with the language behind me, but it's all about building knowledge that's not disconnected from something else. It's about building knowledge that sustains, I think, is at its core.
And I think, you know, there's a really important point in your reflection, Jonathan, about how you sort of first came to this with a Western view, because I think the challenge for a lot of us when we sort of base our work from the academy is that we have to kind of unlearn. I think Alison's reflection that sometimes you can just, it's more intuitive that you know something's breaking the mould. There's kind of a lot of unlearning you have to do as an Indigenous person in the way things are constructed. So I guess for me, to pick one area where it's been really important in terms of my practice is having been a lawyer and learning the way to think in the Western legal framework, was really important to kind of relearn the importance of storytelling as an Indigenous legal framework, and that our Dreamtime stories, or as I would call them, creational cultural stories, are actually stories that are deeply rooted with a worldview and with knowledge. They have often been presented as children's stories, as though they're, you know, nursery rhymes, or without the depth of knowledge. It never ceases to amaze me. I wrote something recently for the Guardian about this, when they found the DNA links 60,000 years ago, and there's this amazing way that you can track the huge continental shifts in Australia through our Dreamtime stories, like where floodwaters rose, etc. There's an enormous amount there. So that is a way, like coming back to that after doing a law school and starting to work as a lawyer, just completely changed the way. I think Jason and I work in the same unit at UTS. I think it's really allowed us to have conversations that break out of the way a Western approach to our legal issues would be. And I think where it's made us better in the work we've tried to do is it's always made us very confident about going outside of what the legal precedent might be to bring back in human stories. And I think Western law is enriched by our storytelling tradition being brought into it. And I think it's made us better advocates, because it's always made us want to put Indigenous voice central to what we're trying to achieve. And when I say that, I don't mean our voices, I mean the voices of the people we're working for. And I think that's been another big part of the methodology, is we have a very different view within our community of who holds knowledge and who has the right to speak and who has wisdom. And a lot of that comes from lived experience as opposed to academic qualifications. So where we seek our wisdom and our advice from in this process of how we would construct a story or how we'd research something is quite different. So I think in all of those ways, which I think all of us do in different ways through our work, you do find that when you try and explore Indigenous methodology, either in a discipline like law or in the academy, there's always a huge element of subversiveness about it, because you are going counter to the expected ways of practicing in that environment.
I guess building on that, I was keen to ask you more about that, because paralleled next to your legal practice, which is extraordinary, is this other extraordinary practice of being a writer, a creative writer. And I mean, I was keen for you maybe to talk about your recent book and I guess how you came to approach those stories and relensing those stories, because I think within that process of reanalyzing that history, we saw something new that wasn't there, which I think is a really important story to tell.
Yeah, and look, I think it's interesting too that all of us who would be academics in one sense are all practitioners, and especially obviously you would put foremost you're a practitioner. And I love that Alison will describe herself as a writer first and a law student now, almost a lawyer second. But I think that there is something about the fact that within our culture, creative practice is a big part of how we explore knowledge, as I think you've given a wonderful example here. We explore ideas, it keeps us connected to culture, and it's therapeutic and it's healing. Creative practice is a big part of what we do. And so I don't think it's surprising that we bring it into our work. And for me, the book you're talking about, Finding Eliza, was really, again, my interest in the way colonialists were, and even more contemporary Australian society was obsessed with this figure of Eliza Fraser, who was this white woman shipwrecked in the 1830s off what's called Fraser Island now. And the way that this was told as a white woman captured by cannibals, surviving this savage culture, where the women were worse to her than the men, until she was finally rescued by people from the Moreton Bay colony. And that was the sort of a boy's own adventure story. But it kind of goes exactly to what you've actually all already said. For me, what I found fascinating was asking the question, what does the obsession about this story tell us about the coloniser? For us, I think, trying to understand what makes them tick is something that often puzzles us, but we want to deconstruct it. Why this story? And in kind of breaking it down, it was kind of that thing, you find out nothing about Aboriginal people when you read this story about this white woman who supposedly lived with Aboriginal people for this period of time, but you find out a lot about what assumptions are and what the main narrative is. And I guess to sort of just try and wrap up what I could talk about for 3 days, I think one of the things that was also very interesting to me about that exploration is this one woman who wasn't captured by cannibals. She was shipwrecked and saved by an Aboriginal community who weren't cannibals, and they actually helped her to survive and got her back to Moreton Bay. Her own story masked what really happened there, but it masked a bigger agenda. This is one story about one white woman who was claimed to have been captured, who wasn't really captured, but the women who were captured on the frontier were Aboriginal women captured by sealers, fishermen, escaped convicts, colonists, etc. That is the national narrative of captivity narratives for women, but we don't have that. So it's sort of part of that process of having to deconstruct that national narrative so that our own narrative can come out, because one of the most important things about doing this work for me was finding how much oral history there was about the Butchulla people, the people who are the traditional owners of Fraser Island, who don't ever get mentioned in any of the other narratives. They're just nameless cannibals, and seeing that actually within their oral history there was a huge counter-narrative and all this wisdom that was still there, that is still alive. And I think that's kind of one of the things I love about this project too, is that where people assume something's lost, like language or stories or memory, in our culture you don't have to dig very hard to find out how much of it is still alive.
I think, recently we were lucky enough to have some Māori academics come over, and for anyone who knows, I guess Māori have really been leading a lot of this methodology process, and it taps on what you were just saying then, this notion that there is, and they highlighted it to us, which was great. It was that we had a lot of light bulb moments, I think, over those workshops, but there was something that they said to us, which was it's almost like we've got two fights. We've got this deconstructing the colonial sort of program, and while at the same time trying to build back up our own knowledge system. So there's this sort of two arms going on here with this Indigenous methodologies, Aboriginal methodologies. I guess in a really practical way, I mean, you were really lucky because you were over in NZ, in Aotearoa, when people like Linda Tuiwoi-Smith were starting to sort of unpack some of these ideas. Because I guess everyone here, I'm guessing, might be wondering still, what is an Aboriginal methodology? What is a method? What are we really talking about here? And in that Māori, kaupapa Māori model, there is kind of like is it sort of like roughly Graham Smith sort of outlines 5 points. Can you maybe talk to those to maybe conceptualise what the Māori experience is?
That's really dangerous. So just to let you know, in our politics, I would not normally try to speak about Māori stuff. But I worked and was mentored by Linda Smith and Graham Smith for a couple of years, and I think with kaupapa Māori theory was a movement. You know, it wasn't some academic exercise. It came out of the 70s. It came out of intense protests. It came out of protests to try to get the Treaty of Waitangi recognised. And I don't know if you'll know, but like in 1840, Māori signed a number of treaties, Māori and English, and subsequently they were dishonoured. And it was through this movement which birthed kaupapa Māori theory and approaches that actually got the treaty recognised in the 80s. And from there, the treaty settlement process started, which created another industry in itself. But in terms of kaupapa Māori theory, I think it's quite complicated, but the main emphasis is on really important cultural paradigms. The important things that bind the Māori world are in this theory. So one of them, for example, is kanohi ke te kanohi, which is the idea that you speak face-to-face with people. So the importance of face-to-face interactions, feeling people's energy, sitting comfortably in silence, honouring the land you're from. These are all quite universal things that all Indigenous peoples hold very highly. And I think I was going on a fieldwork trip with Linda Smith, and she is in our world, she is we really honour her. Like, I was really nervous to go on a trip with her. And she said, one of the most important things about kaupapa Māori theory, or when we're working with our communities, is common sense. She said, we're travelling 200 k's. It's common sense to stop at the McDonald's and go to the toilet there because it's the cleanest toilets on the road, Those sort of things, strategies for survival. Don't forget that our communities are really suffering. Every week someone is getting killed in prisons in this country. Every week another sacred site is being destroyed by mining companies. We need common sense strategies to survive and for our own well-being. So I think the idea of kaupapa Māori theory, remember, it's an emancipatory project. It's a decolonial project. It's about decolonizing yourself, and that's what I've been doing. It's a personal journey. It's a painful journey. Going back to your community when you haven't been in your community, and you go back as a baby, and you slowly grow into your community and learn knowledge and stuff. But I think kaupapa Māori, it was a project for freedom. And not just freedom for Māori people, but for everyone on their lands, because our emancipatory projects are about protecting the land for everyone. So yeah, I guess I haven't got in trouble yet, but that's probably all I could say about that.
That's much better than I could have done it. And I guess, how have you kind of been starting to build in through your work? Because I know working as an academic, you've started to work a lot more, I guess, also with narrative, telling stories, picking up cameras and starting to get people to tell their stories. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you're starting to incorporate some of those ideas through your practice?
My PhD is looking at ways where we are renewing our song traditions through participatory video. And I went back to my elders quite a few years ago, about 7 years ago, and I said, look, I'm a producer now, I've studied law, I'm a treaty and international law expert, I work with the most deadly team, I can do anything you want as a PhD. And my elders went, well, the local reggae band is doing music with young people. We're putting our song traditions into modern music. Why don't you make a music video? And I'm like, what? Are you kidding? And so, of course, I follow my elders. These elders are highly esteemed in the region. They run our ceremonies for our region for about quite a few hundred k's. Everyone comes for ceremony in our town. And so I said, okay, I'll do that. And what I didn't realize, and part of my journey has been just knowing how important story is. It took 3 years of consultation with the elders for the region before I could shoot the song tradition that the elders chose me, which I'm related to, which is the Ngabaya song tradition. That song line travels from Western Australia all the way across the territory to Queensland. It's a significant story and song line, and it connects us. So it's a big responsibility, you know. And speaking of fire, like after 3 years of consultation, to start the process, we actually burned the land and cleansed it. We went to that place over and over again. Everyone in the clip has their law specifically illuminated in the clip. It's aligned with the orientation of the song tradition. Remember, our song traditions, a big part of our song traditions is that it orientates us. So it helps us to understand where we are in the world. And I think that's really important for young people. And now I'm starting to get it, why it was so important that my elders wanted to make a music video. Because inside that music video is just so many different layers. We have our markings in the music video. We have the nuanced dances in the music video. We have the orientation. We have the sacred sites that we're trying to stop mining companies destroy in the music video. So I guess this the idea of communicating sustainable autonomy is part of what we're doing at Jumbunna now, and it seems to be working because I think it's reaching new audiences, and and I think that's really important in today's world, that we reach new audiences, but we maintain the integrity of what we're sharing.
Well, so in terms of just trying to make sure that people start getting some ideas, so we've got, just as a marker point, and I'm not trying to like put lines around anything here, but just to try and get some ideas happening. So notion of recognising stories, you know, and recognising alternative ways of telling stories is obviously a really key sort of crucial moment within understanding these methodologies. The other key one really is this very basic question that is who are you doing your research for? Why are you doing this research? And of course, a lot of the times, if that question, if the answer to that question is just for you, then there's usually problems, and especially within an Aboriginal worldview, there's big problems. And I think it's very confronting, this idea of this, and this is what we were hinting at before, this notion of solo knowledge, this idea that one person holds this knowledge. I can't tell you how enormously embarrassing it is every time people congratulate me on this project, because this project is literally built on the shoulders of so many elders and community members who have contributed to this. This is not my project. The research we do is not our research. It's research which belongs to our communities. It's about strengthening our communities. And so I guess I was really keen to know, with your work when you're starting to do a lot more in your legal world, not that creative book world, which seems to be these amazing parallels that everyone's running at the moment. How are you sort of who are you doing the research for? How is that contributing back to community, and what are those sort of intended outcomes, and how are they playing out?
In terms of my journey towards and indigenising my methodology, I've relished in a little bit of silence and moving towards a place where I don't come with preconceptions, I just come to listen. And that is, I think, in an academy that's so obsessed with kind of people building these knowledge portfolios, it's actually the kind of the skills of being able to step aside from your work, being able to kind of step out of it and assess whether it's actually important at all or whether it's needed in the community, is as just step one. And then it goes from there. So at the moment I'm kind of in this process, like Larissa said, of unlearning. You kind of get fed through in terms of academic progression. You go do your bachelor's, your honours, your master's, your PhD, and it's assumed that you're kind of accumulating knowledge or getting smarter or getting more useful to people. But in my current state, and I'm just a baby in terms of our knowledge, I'm totally useless to anyone, even though I might think, a big shot. It's my ability to set myself aside and listen and actually be receptive and be a tool for people to use that makes a good methodology, that makes a good researcher. And so to that extent, I'm not doing much at the moment, which is probably the best thing I could do.
I would actually disagree with that.
Yes, we do.
I just disagree with it because I do a lot of work with Alison, and she works on a lot of things. She's doing research projects, working on research projects with me, doing some really important work on women in prison. But I just want to. You heard how modest she was about her contribution, and in a way, I think that's very reflective of her Indigenous grounding. I think it's very easy. I don't know if this was mentioned, but Alison was in 2015 the Indigenous Law Student of the Year, the Australian Indigenous Law Student of the Year. So she's a pretty big deal. And so for a lot, she didn't start with that, did she? But I think for a lot of people, those sort of accolades that get given to you by the academy can make you think that you do already have it. And I think it's it kind of does show your cultural connection, to be able to actually say, well, that not that you're not ashamed of it, you're proud of it, but you don't let that be the thing that guides you. And I have seen you sit in meetings with people who are older than you, but also people who are there working in prisons. You're enormously respectful and you just listen. So she does what she did say, but I think she sort of underplayed the extent to which she is doing it, and it's probably a really good example, because as you say, Jonathan, it is that thing. Working in the academy, one of the biggest challenges we have with our own community is their suspicion of academia and research. And I think it's been a big part, especially I know for Jason and me who've been doing this for a long time, that having to get the community to start to see us not as people who do research on them, but as a resource. That they have to, and I say this, we do our best work when the community comes to us and says, this is what we need, how can you help us? Rather than us going out and saying, well, this is what we think you might benefit from. And I think that kind of just goes to your question of that. But Alison did a terrible job of telling how good she was in this space, so I just felt I had to jump in and defend her.
From myself.
Picking up on the idea that you did raise, this notion of being mindful of what you pick up, mindful of what you can contribute to, not always putting your hand up as if you're trying to get more rungs on the board, which of course is the academic way of doing things. How many times have you published? How many times have you, shown up somewhere? Following that, I was also keen for you to talk about the Djambana's research and how you guys are very mindful about projects that you take on. You're very mindful about the role Djambana can play in supporting communities and how that can happen. And obviously too, I'd love to, maybe just comment a little bit on, of course, the connection with Bowraville, because the Gumangir language, which is in fact sitting in that colonnade, is in fact very much part of this connection as well.
Yeah, so we would say, and as Jason and I set up the research unit over 10 years, well, it'd be 15 years ago now. Yeah, so it's been a long thing, and there's only sort of five and a half of us. There's a part-time person, not a half a person. 5 and a half of us on the team, so it's a small team, But and that's been a deliberate decision. And we would say we take a self-determining approach to research, which means that our question is, flowing on from what you say, who is this research for? It's actually deeper than that for us. It's how are we benefiting the community, and what are we doing to empower or build capacity within it. It's not just, are we doing something that will help, but how is this a broader project? And it means that it means that we don't take on work unless we have a relationship or people come to us. So with Bowraville, which is the 3 Aboriginal children who were murdered in 1990, 1991, there's been a big campaign to bring this person who committed these crimes to justice for this community. We were very aware of that case when it happened, but we didn't get involved until the community came to us, and we had that same relationship with them. So everything that we've done with them since we got involved is to lay out what their options are and support them in the decisions that they want to make. So we never go in and say, we think you should do X, Y, and Z. We say, these are your options, what do you want to do? And if that's what you want to do, how can we support you? And I think the other thing about building those relationships is we don't work with a lot of communities. We work with a few, and we work with them really, like, as Indigenous people, our relationships are hugely important to us. So with Barraville, with Borroloola, with other, the Ngarrindjeri, Gunditjmara, whoever else we work with, we would not just go in, say, with Barraville and do work on the case. For us, anything that comes up within those families, whether it's a child welfare issue, an issue around housing, some other matter, if they ring us to say we need help, we see that as part of our work on this research project. We're not there just doing one thing. We work with them holistically, and we really understand that relationship. So that's why we can't do that with everyone, because it is a really full-time thing. But I would say that it makes it so much more rewarding. We are parts of those community. Obviously Jason's from Borroloola, but our work's brought us all in there, and we're part of that family. That's really precious to us. We're part of the families in Barraville. And I would say that's probably the other thing about this Indigenous approach. It is deeper. It's more about relationships. It's about thinking about how you're bringing your skills to do what the community wants to do. And it's really hard work because you really care about it. It must be really great for researchers who can go home at the end of the day and then think about something else. But that's just not how we do it. So it's our life in our research is bigger than our life anywhere else.
Should we have some questions from public? Does anyone have any questions that are starting to emerge? I could keep asking questions. Someone's tentatively raising their hand there, which is sort of very...
Hi, I'm 5 generations Australian, but I don't see any Indigenous in my history, though I've got to check my genealogical records. But what I want to say is I'm very much a friend of the Indigenous, and I'm wondering if any advice can be given to how non-Indigenous people can help in aspects of this decolonising process you're talking about. Separate from indigeneity, I've got some problems with colonisation, but especially so when we look at in Australia. I've started myself to gain a lot of awareness through walking some songlines, and a lot of what you're talking about today is very interesting to me because I've breached the shell of understanding, and I'm starting to grasp many aspects of Australian Indigenous people, but I'm not sure how to go forward and contribute, or should I stand back and listen as you advised?
I'll go first. Look, I have a really strong belief that one of the biggest resources Indigenous and untapped resources Indigenous Australia have are non-Indigenous people who really care about Indigenous people and our position, but are too reluctant to act because they don't want to cause offence. First thing I'd say is get in there, make mistakes, and don't be afraid, because the skills you can bring, if you do the work properly, are really important. Our team at Jumbana is half Indigenous, half non-Indigenous, so we very deeply believe that this is a partnership and that people can bring skills. But I do think that a lot of what we're saying is about how the questions you ask yourself in terms of when you act, like, why am I doing this? Who am I doing it for? And I think that is part of the trick. I often get lots of people who come and say, we're doing this great new project, or we're doing work on domestic violence, and we'd really love some Indigenous people to be involved. Can you find someone to help me? And the first thing I'd say is, why don't you ask Indigenous women what they want in terms of assistance around domestic violence and craft your response around that? So you see how that's a really different way in? And I think starting to be reflective about some of those questions might make people more brave about getting in there and acting, because I can tell you, people who are antagonistic to Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous people aren't shy about going forward and acting against us. But we really can use more mobilisation from people who are interested, who have skills to bring, but it's about how you do that, and I think the other people on the panel could probably add to that.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. And it's about relationships. Yeah. And like in our work, we make really dangerous enemies. Like we have mining companies that really upset with us. We have murderers that are still walking around that are really upset with us. You know, and I think a lot of us are living a little bit more of a privileged life than mob in the community. We're at the front line of some of that stuff that might hit us, and also in terms of well-being and stuff. So I think it's important to do things that you're really passionate about, and that passion will come out, and it's kind of infectious, I think. If someone's really passionate about something and has great energy, and you're in that space, suddenly you feel a bit more, we can do this. You know, and that's the only thing I'd say. It's just sort of like, you know, the passion and good energy and following Indigenous elders and leaders. Not necessarily leaders, not anointed leaders, but just people doing shit, you know, doing stuff in the community. Those are the people that we need support more. Not so much those that we've got a lot of support in institutions, but.
Yeah, I think that's it's fantastic that you have this kind of.
We're all way too
Oh, we're way
polite.
too. No, you go. No, you go. It's fantastic to see that energy and also your willingness to contribute, because there's so much heavy lifting to be done. And you're often kind of stuck in these two roles where you want to do kind of this really complex, kind of like long time frame decolonizing work, but you also have like immediate triaging problems right now that you need to get to. And sometimes it's just a question of power. Like how do you get so much critical mass behind you if you can't also get non-Indigenous people to kind of, I guess, pull their weight in the decolonial journey? But the other crucial thing is thinking about your role within decolonization, not as kind of like a static learned thing. You will never necessarily reach kind of that state where you are a perfect resource, where you're a perfect ally. It's about keeping that openness and receptiveness to change, because not only do you kind of change within your role, your context change, community needs change, and your position within that will shift so many times. So it's kind of being, to use a very overused word, agile about how you approach your relationship with the Indigenous community.
I would, the only thing I would sort of add is just sort of saying it is extraordinarily entrenched, this colonial project. It's unbelievably entrenched. You sit down, and I mean, even working out why Aboriginal people die younger than everyone else, working out why Aboriginal people are sitting in jails at much higher rates. These aren't simple questions. You know, these are very complex ways of pulling these things apart. They're very complex webs. So it's, yeah, I mean, this notion of being agile and trying to somehow stay on top of these issues, which are just extraordinary. But at the very end of the day, and you know, anyone who knows me, I always quote other people because I know little to nothing. But Uncle Frank, I'm lucky enough to work with some men up in the APY lands who are really disenfranchised, like so many other communities. And Uncle Frank says, like, you know, we're happy to work with anyone as long as they're standing next to us and not in front of us. That notion of who's driving this, who's running this story, and which comes back, of course, to what Larissa said, this idea that who's benefiting this research, like, you know, and why we're not going to the people who are experiencing the problem and asking them to design these research questions and research processes for us, opposed to that filtering down. So even though people think they're doing very admirable jobs, and that's what's it's difficult, because there are some extraordinary people out there who think they're doing great things for us, but it is this top-down approach, this standing in front and not standing beside us, and we need people to stand beside us, and that's what I'd suggest. Yeah.
because this is my bugbear, so I have to say it. And this. Okay. This is especially so from the non-Indigenous NGO sector. Honestly, one of the biggest issues facing our community at the moment, that our community organisations are constantly being defunded, and that money is going to non-Indigenous NGOs who then come in and take Indigenous staff and their knowledge. So in that, I just have to say there are very simple, real ways that people who think they are helping can seriously rethink that concept of self-determination and fundamentally change and support our communities. Just have to say that.
Is there a question? Someone's... Oh, there we go. There's a little...
It's about the song lines, because I can't quite visualise how they extend over such a wide area, and what and how do they convey the message that they want to express? Could you hear me?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of deep knowledge around songlines. It's become quite a popularized term, I think, songlines. And for us, one of the terms for songlines is gudjiga, and it's a really sacred sort of thing. So it's the equivalent of a title deed for a house. So, you know, you buy a house, you go to the conveyance and you spend $20,000 to a lawyer to do something for half an hour, and they give you a bit of paper, and that's your title to the house. Well, for us, up home, you know, our gudjiga, people that carry that, it shows authority over the land. Yeah, it's a really, really important thing. And part of that, the idea of, I think the songlines, the mapping of it, the stories, they're all, it's an embedded canons of law. So it's like an ancient jurisprudence. Yeah, and but it's not text based or stuck in an institution.
No, I do understand.
That sort of thing. Yeah.
Another question. And then any other questions? Oh, JK's got one. Little off topic. Sorry? Oh, here we go.
You mentioned before the song line from Western Australia to Queensland. So how do you extend it that distance?
How do you extend it? These are creation stories. So these stories are actually the way that the land was created. It gives us markers and articulates the way that we conduct ourselves as well. But they're also significant creation stories along the way, and they're linked through. They have different names, you know, but it's all one significant song line. Yeah, it's a very, very complex and high level knowledge thing that I'm not really allowed to talk about too much. But I think the beauty of it is that they, in my mind, in my personal opinion, they're still alive and with us. So that's there for everyone, and it's such a beautiful part of the culture. And the canons of law that are embedded in this are really important, and they can provide the roadmap for us out of this, you know, we're in a crisis, you know. And I think some of that, in terms of the ways that you look after land and look after the relationships between each other, that can be shared. I really believe that, and that's why I think my elders we've started to share some of that stuff. You know, only the things that we're allowed to share, but it's an important moment for Australia. I really hope people take this up and start to really go into this in a deep way, because I think it's a moment, and yeah, it's an exciting moment as well.
I guess I'd also, in terms of like bringing that back to how to understand Aboriginal methodologies, I guess what's really important about this idea is listening to country. You know, this is a really fundamental thing that Aboriginal people have been telling Australia for a long, long time is that you listen to country. Country has these stories trapped in it. There's bones in this landscape. There's knowledge in this country. And in order to try and pull them out, we need to slow down. We need to think about things. We need to pay a little bit more attention to everyone around us and a little bit more attention to this country. And these stories will reveal themselves. And I think that, you know, this is part of this methodology and part of this process that we're talking about. Any other questions? No? We've lost the sun a little bit, so thanks for bearing with us. I did want to end with one idea. So here you've got these 4 flash fellas up here talking about these ideas, but I'd really like to acknowledge our aunties from Wagga, who drove all the way from Wagga to show us weaving. And I was lucky enough to hear the introduction, and the introduction was simple, that they decided that women would come together in the community to share knowledge, to sit down and to spend time with each other and to listen to stories. That's an Aboriginal methodology. That methodology is healing that community. That methodology is healing a resettlement community like Wagga, bringing people together, sharing their stories, sharing their knowledge, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people coming together. They're living it. That's what this is about. And so, you know, thank you so much for coming, you know, and being this extraordinary example of this methodology that we've been talking about today. So if ever you get an opportunity like that, this notion of just sitting down, sharing stories like we have today, and I really think that a key part of this story, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, is about this moment of sharing stories and sharing knowledge. So thank you all so much for being here. Again, the responsibility is back on you to take this story forward, to learn, to talk about what you've learned here today with people you know, to share this knowledge, to build this knowledge, and become a stronger community for it. So thank you for being part of this. And I'd encourage you all this afternoon at 5 o'clock. Auntie Julie Freeman will be sharing stories with us over back underneath those trees. Auntie Jules is from the South Coast and Lapa communities, and will again really reveal these stories of this country and get us to see country in a new way. So please come back for that. And again, programs tomorrow. But please join me again in thanking our wonderful panellists today.